Hi, I'm Glenn Kreisberg, author of Spirits in Stone and co-founder of the Overlook Mountain Center in Woodstock, New York, overlookmountain.org, and you're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronymus. Keep listening.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Of course, you know who I am. I'm Dr. Bob Hieronymus, and for the remaining minutes in our program, we're going to talk to my old friend, Dr. Robert Schoch. We want you to support his Kickstarter campaign to raise funds and awareness for the Organization for the Research of Ancient Cultures, or ORACUL, ORACUL, and a new film they are making to start in Egypt later this summer. Because our time is so limited, by way of a very brief introduction, I'm going to read to you. No, I'm not even going to do that because we are so short of time. It would be a waste to get into that particular area. Are you with us there, Robert Schoch?
I am. It's a pleasure to speak with you again.
Ditto. How have you been?
I've been well. You?
B+. I'm still a B+. And someday
we'll get you up to an A+.
Yeah, well, by the end of the night, we should be able to do that. So tell us about the documentary film project you and your wife, Katie, are making. I understand it's about the origins of civilization going back to the last ice age and what brought the earlier cycle of civilization to a close.
That is exactly right. And you just put it in a beautiful nutshell. It's really about the origins of civilization, and this is something that you know, and I think many of your listeners know, I've worked on for a number of years now, going back to my early work on the Sphinx, which demonstrates that the Sphinx itself, the Great Sphinx of Egypt, has its origins thousands of years earlier than dynastic Egypt, thousands of years earlier than the conventional story says that civilization arose. We now have lots of evidence around the world demonstrating that there was an earlier cycle of civilization, that civilization did not begin about 6,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, which is what the conventional story says, with Sumer and dynastic Egypt and early China. But in fact, there was civilization, true civilization, going back to about 10,000 BC at the end of the last ice age. This is my work on the Sphinx, the work at Gobekli Tepe in Turkey, which is incredibly sophisticated, yet 12,000 years old. And we will also go into what brought this round of civilization to a close. My work has demonstrated that at the very end of the last ice age, snapping us out of that cold spell, were solar events, major solar outbursts.
Well, the new, the new documentary will cover your work on the Great Sphinx and Gobekli Tepe. Boy, excuse me?
Yes, exactly. In fact, we're going to start filming in Egypt just next month in May. We're leaving in 2 weeks to begin filming there in conjunction with a couple of tours that I'll also be leading, sort of following in the footsteps of our friend late John Anthony West.
Yeah.
And we'll start filming in Egypt. Later in the year, we would plan to go to Turkey to film at Gobekli Tepe, and then we'll be traveling to other sites around the world to film also.
Well, as I note that for many years, you and late John Anthony West, what a guy. What a guy. He changed, have you ever heard of a person by the name of Christopher Bird who did Secret Life of Plants?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, he was the best man at our wedding, and it was he that introduced us to John Anthony West's work. He made sure, and I don't know, I think he must have purchased about 24 of his, something that I've forgotten the name of the first book, the most important book. Serpent.
He's written, John Anthony West wrote a number of books, but the famous ones on Egypt are Traveler's Key to Ancient Egypt and Serpent in the Sky.
Serpent in the Sky. He was giving them out like hotcakes. And
wow.
When anyone came to his home, and he had all kinds of scholars coming into his home all the time, but that's one of the first things he would hand them, a copy of that.
Yeah, it's a great book. And I don't know if you remember, or I think I've mentioned this to you, when John Anthony West was, he was very sick at the end. He died in February of last year, 2018, and he would give these incredible tours to Egypt. And, of course, I traveled to him many times and been with him when he gave some of them, but he couldn't give the last one that had been scheduled, and I ended up taking it for him, which
isn't that something?
Was sort of bittersweet, should we say.
Yeah.
Leading it. So we're following his tradition. His dream was actually, this is in part something that he had wanted to do, to produce this documentary that goes this new documentary, in some ways people see it as a successor to Mystery of the Sphinx 25 years ago, but there's so much more evidence now for this earlier cycle of civilization, Gobekli Tepe being a major site, which John Anthony West and I had the opportunity to visit together, some years before he passed away. He always wanted to include that in a new documentary, but also other sites around the world and the key of what happened to this earlier civilization.
Well, you're not going to believe this, but I think he's with us tonight.
Oh, I think so.
What a genius! What a very giving person. Yeah, it's really something to. I was very fortunate to even come in contact with you, and I wanted to thank you for years for allowing us to break the story on this. It made it was a great wonder to me that because I had to deal with Zahi Hawass. By the way, is Zahi Hawass still hanging around there?
He's still hanging around.
Jeez. I'm not saying anything about him right now, but he had no choice but to deal with me because of Anwar al-Sadat. We worked under Anwar al-Sadat when we went to Egypt, and he did not necessarily like that because he was basically told that where we were going to go, and the kind of freedom we had, and of course, a lot of people were not happy about our freedom at that time.
Right.
With whom are you working with to create this new documentary?
Oh, we're working with a very talented filmmaker. Jim Fields is his name, and he's a professional. He's done quite a lot of work over the years. He's actually a Emmy-winning filmmaker, just like Mystery of the Sphinx won an Emmy back 25 years ago. So we're working with a very talented person, Jim Fields. He's actually known. Some of you listeners may appreciate this. If you or the listeners know the band, they're no longer around, the band Ramones.
Oh, sure, yes.
Yeah, exactly. He actually did a documentary on the Ramones, among other things. It was called, let me get it right, End of the Century, The Story of the Ramones. End of the Century, The Story of the Ramones, and he's very well known for that. Which is one of his documentaries, won a number of awards, and was a theatrical documentary that did very well. So, and he actually approached me about doing this, which was wonderful. And I say that in the most positive sense, because what you want, at least what I was looking for, was someone who is really interested in this story, really passionate about it also, and we found that in Jim Fields. So I'm very excited working with such a talented person. And a number of other people have come forward, and we may get involved with it because at some point we're going to need, of course, once we get further on, we're going to need a lot of post-production, underscoring with music, and we have a number of talented people who have come forward and offered their services. So we're just so appreciative. And if I could say, we have met our Kickstarter goal of $50,000, but we would like to go beyond that because, the more money we can raise, and I don't want to sound the wrong way, but, the better we can do. And we're just very excited about this. And also we'd like to include maybe some research. So if we could raise more funds, we could include further research that can go into the documentary.
Yeah.
Again, using the Mystery of the Sphinx back 25-plus years ago, where part of the Mystery of the Sphinx was actually doing original research, which then made it into the film.
Well, you leave for Egypt in just a few weeks, is that right?
We leave for Egypt, in 2 weeks, actually.
2 weeks?
I think I'll be on the flight just about now in 2 weeks.
My God.
Yeah,
How many times?
2 weeks.
How many times have you been to Egypt?
Oh, people ask me that, and I don't remember.
2 or 3 times.
I lost track some time ago because my first trip was with John Anthony West in 1990, and I will never forget the first trip, specifics of the first trip. But I've been back so many times, so I don't want to say quite a second home, but Egypt's wonderful, as you know.
After Egypt, where do you plan to film next?
We plan to go to Turkey. So the next step in the series of filming sites will be Turkey. That's what we anticipate. And there are a number of sites in Turkey. Probably the most important, the most significant is Gobekli Tepe, which we were just talking about. But we also have other sites in Turkey. In particular, another major site that we want to film at is Cappadocia, the Cappadocia region with the underground cities, some of which I am absolutely convinced their origins go back to this earlier cycle of civilization. We also want to look at, for instance, the site of Çatalhöyük and some similar sites which are intermediate between the end of the last ice age and then the reemergence of civilization 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, because that's part of the story, part of the documentary also. So Turkey will be the next major site. After that, we might do some in Asia. We might go to Easter Island. This is now projecting. We have to decide how many funds we have to deal with and what we can do next. But Turkey would definitely be immediately after Egypt.
Wow, Gobekli Tepe. That to me almost came out of the blue. 8 years ago?
It definitely came out of the blue in some ways, where it caught a lot of archaeologists and historians really off guard, because it was one thing to belittle me. I hate to say it this way, but to belittle me about my work on the Sphinx and say, you just don't understand Egyptology. And so many of them said to me bluntly, okay, if the Sphinx is that much older, where is there evidence of the same antiquity, the same sophistication thousands of years earlier elsewhere in the world? And then Gobekli Tepe was discovered. And, really, as John Anthony West used to say, it was a smoking gun, the second major site where you can't question it, because it was being, and still is being, excavated by the German Archaeological Institute in conjunction with the Turkish archaeologists. The late Klaus Schmidt, unfortunately, he passed away also, but he was doing meticulous work at Gobekli Tepe, absolutely meticulous, unquestionable, and it is really that old.
Is it beyond 10,000 years?
Beyond 10,000 years. The major portion of the site's about 12,000 years old.
Okay.
So about 10,000 BC, before the end of the last ice age.
Wow. Boy.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's more time, the time from Gobekli Tepe time to classic Stonehenge, classic dynastic Egypt, classic Mesopotamia. The difference in time between Gobekli Tepe and those other classic sites, which we think of as very ancient, is longer than from them to us.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that.
That's how old it is.
Wow. And hey, how is your wife?
Oh, Katie. Katie's doing wonderfully. And in fact, she's very involved with the project, with the documentary. I don't know if you realize it, but she has a background in theater and dance and film and that type of thing. So she's actually working with Jim Fields. We'll be working with Jim Fields on this production very closely. She's a very good storyteller, very good editor. So I've got to say she's very much a driving force behind this.
Well, but she, especially Easter, she really impressed me about Easter Island.
Oh, yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because, it's so wonderful to have a partner who is really behind with you know.
Exactly. No, I couldn't do it without her. But yes, Easter Island, I think what you're referring to, among other things, is she is the one who discovered that the Rongo script, which is this formerly, because I now believe we understand where it's coming from, this so-called undeciphered script of Easter Island, and it's the only Polynesian Pacific island that has any kind of, quote, writing or script. She put it together that actually this was recording what was happening in the sky during the major solar outburst, during this catastrophe at the end of the last ice age. And she tied this in with ancient petroglyphs that Los Alamos, from Dr. Peratt from Los Alamos, had discovered that ancient petroglyphs around the world, recorded what was happening in the skies during this tumultuous time at the end of the last ice age with solar outbursts. And Katie put together that was also being recorded, not just in the petroglyphs.
Okay, we're almost out of time, and I want to make sure you get out the information for people to work to send anything into the Kickstarter.
I'm sorry?
We're almost out of time, and we need you to tell our listeners how they can get the money to you in regards to the next Kickstarter.
Please, yes. So there's a Kickstarter site. We have just maybe not quite 2 weeks left, and I hope people will continue to pledge. If they go to my website, which is Robert Schoch, RobertSchoch.com. My name is Robert Schoch, so SCHOCH.
And that's it. We got to say goodbye. But hang on the line so we can talk.
Stay connected with stimulating talk and breaking news on Talk Radio 680 WCBM, Baltimore, and WCBM.com.